All right, good afternoon, everyone. Do we usually do roll call first since there's still a lot of people, or some people?
Yeah.
Or-
I think Gail is listening in and she'll probably call.
Okay, so Gail, if you'd like to do the roll call, that's probably the first thing we need to do.
Sure, let me get everybody moved over. Okay, has the recording started, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So roll call. Jeff Sims, Mike Williams,
Here.
Brian McCarthy,
Here.
Jonathan Scott,
Here.
Brian Pissarro.
Chris Jaddick is filling in for Brian today from T-Bar.
Thank you. Michael English, Cal Hardy, Robert Frey,
Anna Quinones is here for Bob.
thank you. Clay Hollis.
Present.
Let's see, Gina Evans is excused. Is Christine Bolonois there?
No. No,
Leland Dykes is excused. Christianitis.
Present.
Mark Hudson.
Here.
And Danny Jorgensen is excused as Margaret Kubelin's here.
I'm online.
Thank you.
This is Danny.
Oh, Danny. Hi, Danny. I'm sorry. And Jay Collins,
Present.
Jennifer Malone,
Here.
Nicole Sutton,
Present.
and Sarah Caper, or Richard Rank.
Sarah's going to join us remotely. Maybe
I see her online.
And Gail, I don't know if you heard me, but Jeff Sims, our chair, will be here any minute. He's second track.
I did, and would the vice chair like to call for a vote of consent for remote participation, as we do have an in-person quorum?
okay. So can we have a motion for having people online today?
This is Jay Collins, make a motion for remote participation.
Jonathan Scott, second.
Jay made the motion, Jonathan made the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone let's start. Anyone in person speak to public comment? I don't see anybody, none. I don't know if there's anyone online. Can you check to see if there's anyone online that wants to speak to public comment?
If anybody does, they do have the ability to unmute themselves.
Okay. Give me just a second. Okay, seeing none, that'll close the public comment. The next item is the minutes. Minutes from the June 6, 2022 meeting. Any notes or concerns with the minutes from the last meeting? We didn't have a July meeting this year as we normally do. Seeing none, can we have a motion?
Jay Collins, motion to approve as provided.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
Full Sutton, second.
Okay, Nicole, so we had a motion from Jay to approve the minutes and a second from Nicole. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None. Motion carries unanimously to approve the minutes. And the first item on the agenda is the freight supply chain resilience study. And Jason Sneak from AECOM, I guess, is here to speak to that.
Hi, Chair. I wanted to give a quick introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Allison Yeh. I'm the project manager for the study, and I'm really very excited to introduce this new topic of supply chain resilience to this committee. So we see in the media, there's lots of coverage on shortages of products and services, and this is something we hear about enough that the TPO wants to learn more about our critical supply chains in the county and how they might be disrupted and how we can address that. So we have here today with us Jason Smeek, who's AECOM's Associate VP for Global Supply Chain and Logistics, and our AECOM Project Manager, Lauren Brooks. So I'm going to turn up the presentation over to Jason, and we'll be here with questions when we're done. Thank you.
Sounds great. Well, can you hear me okay, Allison?
Yes, I can hear you great.
Team? Perfect. Would it be possible to be past the presenter rights? Perfect. Let's see here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. I am Jason Smeek, AVP of Global Supply Chain and Logistics at AECOM, and I have spent my entire career working on supply chain related issues, starting from the manufacturing space all the way through logistics and distribution, warehousing. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about the study that we have done with Hillsborough County and the TPO. We'll go through a number of background slides and then jump into some specific recommendations that we have developed through the analysis of the supply chains here in the county and Tampa Bay region, as well as looking at some of those elements that will be foreshadowed for you today that will be coming out in our final report at the end of the month. So really our project, am I covering the screen or you can see it?
Part of the slide is cut off.
Okay, just a second.
Sure.
How about now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So the objectives of the study were really to identify the key supply chains in Hillsborough County and look at how they could be impacted or disrupted during certain disaster or disruption scenarios. We mapped the supply chains of 5 different commodities and services and identified the potential supply chain vulnerabilities that existed due to these disruptions, and also looked at some of the enablers that support supply chains within the region. We also recommended actions out of this study that mitigate impacts and strengthen overall supply chain resilience and establish ongoing engagement with our key supply chain partners and communities, which is a critical outcome of this project. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Hold on.
but we don't see your screen anymore. And I don't know how that happened, but let me see if it's something on your end or ours.
It could be on my end. It looks like I'm fully connected. Lauren, can you see?
Yeah, we can see online.
Yeah, we can see online.
Minimize it, Gina. Minimize this one.
Yeah.
And then.
Yeah,
I
keep
got it.
minimizing it,
Thank you.
yeah.
No, you're back.
And you're good, Jeff.
You're back. Sorry about that. It was our end.
Keep working.
Please continue. That's my one contribution. It was definitely us. Thanks. Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, let me see if you guys see everything fine now. Is that correct?
No, your slide's cut off again.
Yeah, I can hear.
It just needs to be enlarged.
Yeah, on our, yeah.
How about now?
It's good.
You're good.
Yes.
Okay. You know, I have a funny story actually that fits into all of this. We had a power outage and a power surge just a few minutes ago before this presentation. It shows you how reliant we are on technology today, and that's one of the pieces we'll talk about later in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and keep moving here today. Let me know if you have any issues seeing the screen. So as a background, the timeline, we had 3 different tasks. The first was identifying commodities and services as well as disaster scenarios that would be applicable for Hillsborough County, also those that would be best to study in the study, and also determine out of a very large list of those, you know, which ones we would like to focus the analysis on. Task 2 focused on the March to the July timeframe, looking at the commodity flows themselves using data sets that are publicly available, such as the FAF and BTS data sets that indicate the amount of spend that's expended within certain supply chain nodes, and that gives us a sense of what the supply chain maps look like. I'll show you an example of that later today. We did stakeholder small group interviews during that time frame, April of 2022, and then moved on into one-on-one interviews that enabled us to hone in on some of these specific commodities and services and disasters and disruptions that then gave us a number of great insights, including some of those from you in the audience, that were incorporated into our study. And then task 3 is May through this month, really looking at the supply chain resiliency recommendations and culminating with large stakeholder group meetings such as this, and also a final report that's due the end of the month. So the study framework itself, we really looked at a number of different pieces of input data sets, elements that we could study during this study. We looked at a number of literature and case studies themselves specific to disasters, disruptions, as well as supply chain resiliency that we incorporate into the study. One of the guiding documents that we utilized in this was Department of Homeland Security's Supply Chain Resilience Guide, which helped to serve as a guideline in these type of studies and in this study as well. And really looked at the community lifelines themselves, those that are identified by FEMA, to help us get a sense of what would be critical for us in Hillsborough County and the region during a disaster disruption. We had looked at data sets, specifically the Phoenix model, as well as other hurricane models and other models of freight density, et cetera. And those data elements went into the study as well as informed our recommendations. And importantly, we incorporated stakeholder and community input. We did some stakeholder small group interviews, as was mentioned earlier, but also did some community sessions and individual stakeholder interviews, as was mentioned previously. So what were the 5 commodities? The 5 commodities were food and grocery, water and wastewater utilities, housing material, healthcare services and medicine, and fuel distribution. And why we chose these was that these all were a good starting point for Hillsborough County in this initial study of supply chains, because they are so critical to the proper functioning of supply chains and the well-being of the populace. And because of the criticality during really all of these disasters, we were able to look at these in detail and figure out, okay, where might certain recommendations exist. So I mentioned previously that the data sets that we utilized, as well as the studies and other resources, informed a number of supply chain maps that helped us understand better the supply chains that are present in Hillsborough County. These supply chain maps were drawn for each of the supply chain commodities and services that we mentioned previously, and really take us through the input phase or raw material phase. So for example, here, this is the food and grocery supply chain map. Takes us through, for example, the water, seed, fertilizer that goes into suppliers, agricultural suppliers, to the production phase, to the processing phase, the wholesale phase, the actual retail phase, consumption, and then in some cases, the waste phase that then starts the process over. We also identified supply chain partners that exist in the region, such as the financial supply chain partners, those that are knowledge supply chain partners, and other supply chain partners. What is important to note too with this is that it gave us a sense of what the modal split was for each of these elements of the supply chain. For example, in this case, at the beginning of this supply chain, there's 59.7% truck transport here in the input to supplier phase. And also incorporated a number of data points that gave us some more insights into how these supply chains function from an input and a import perspective. For example, the percent in Tampa MSA that was purchased versus out of the Tampa MSA, and the key suppliers and vendors that exist in region. We can use that information to also target further discussion with those in the supply chains themselves, especially those that are in the private sector. The disaster scenarios that were chosen and vetted with those small group interviews were cyber attack. For example, a supervisory control and data acquisition system, so SCADAs that are very routinely, if not widespread use throughout the electric network. then has been infiltrated and compromised by malware, creating subsequent blackouts. Transportation incident, a tanker truck heading eastbound on I-4 collides with the median supports of the southbound I-75 overpass, which sparks a fire, causing a I-75 southbound bridge to collapse. And then flooding and wind event, we actually looked at Category 5 hurricane in downtown Tampa to study. And why we did these and also developed kind of hypotheticals was that we wanted to take all the inputs around what these disasters and disruptions did as far as impacts and make this a little bit more real as far as the analysis that was done during the study. Importantly, as well as the assessment of climate change impacts to these, specific to flooding and wind events, of course, with sea level rise, but also the impacts to broader systems such as food systems, et cetera. Stakeholder and community outreach was also very important to the project. We did do 6 group interviews around resilience, transportation, communications and utilities, economic and land use, emergency management and medical, and then freight. We also did community sessions with 2 different community groups, and then worked heavily to work as much as we could with the public and private sectors to incorporate those feedback pieces and recommendations for the specific supply chains, as well as vet the analysis that was done. I'm not going to read through all of these, but we had a lot of great inputs around the supply chain disruptions and challenges. What we saw were a number of those that pertain to workforce, to utilities, to other transportation elements that really are enablers for proper functioning of the supply chain. And when we're talking about supply chains being disrupted, the most effective thing that we can do is reestablish a proper functioning supply chain as quickly as possible. And that really requires the ability to prop up or ensure that the response after a disaster helps the workforce get back in place, utilities, et cetera. Very similar to what we do with hazard mitigation or recovery in the county. The other thing that was really important to note is that many of these specific commodities and services have a direct impact on the supply chains that we analyze, such as fuel, right? And Tampa's in a very unique place given the position of the fuel imports to the port, as well as the Central Florida pipeline to Orlando. So it's a critical node for that supply chain as an example. And we know that a lot, if not everything, runs on fuel. Some of the lessons learned: redundancy is key. We have to look for resource substitutions as well as manual processes, even in this day and age. Look at staffing plans and how we handle the workforce during such disasters and disruptions. And really, how do we train the management as well as those that are working in the workforce on being more resilient, applying other best practices in the process. Our supply chain disruption methodology that we applied, we looked at the cyber attack and transportation incident, and did a lot more research in literature and case studies for those. And then on the flooding, dipping, and wind events, we focused on the HAZUS model and the Phoenix model, coupled with sea level rise to look at what the impacts could be. So we took a mixed approach for this and then applied those to the commodity supply chains and then developed a list of observations, impacts, and those hypothetical case scenarios as we discussed previously. And then out of that analysis, actionable recommendations. I mentioned the supply chain enablers previously. Some of these are workforce, financial flows, utilities, of course, very important to all of us for the TPO, as transportation, and supply chain partners, communications, and vulnerable populations and neighborhoods. Those were really important in our analysis, and we developed and honed our recommendations around those so we could ensure that, you know, if there's a piece of these missing, we were able to identify elements that could make them more resilient. I will also mention that I didn't mention before, in addition to the 3 disaster scenarios that we had identified, we did do combinations, cyber attack and transportation, as well as cyber attack and flooding and wind events, to see what the impact might be on compounding events here. You know, frankly, you know, for the flooding, wind event, and cyber mixed case, right, a lot of that was really overshadowed by the scale and the impact of that flooding, wind event, or you could think a tropical system as an example. And the cyber attack and transportation incident really was more of a kind of a plus situation where you had both of them compounding each other. Some of the outcomes that we saw in general, we saw that there was a very strong link between climate change, ESG, and supply chain resilience. It's important that to note that if the society itself and the infrastructure itself is more equitable, resilient, and sustainable under normal circumstances, then it will be more resilient under emergency circumstances. So what we can do to make our infrastructure better from that perspective, or our workforce or other inputs, enablers into the process more resilient from a sustainability ESG perspective, then that will be helpful in these situations. Other hazards are not as often talked about, obviously, in Florida than hurricanes. We plan a lot and do tabletop exercise, et cetera, around those. Others need to be considered, especially this day and age, as we see that cyber terrorism and other hazards are increasing. We came up with approximately 80 actionable recommendations. I won't go through all of them today, obviously, but they will be in our final report. And I will give you a foreshadowing of some of those today. Many are transportation related, others are enabler related and pertain to general resiliency and recovery. This is what we came up with, really a nice broad set of recommendations, including grant opportunities, transportation, additional study or research that's required, coordination, and then training, tool, and education related. And a number of these can be broken up into TPO roles such as leader, collaborator, facilitator, where we can take action post-study to further the efforts here in resiliency. I'm not going to go through all of these. There's a lot of great material for you in the final report coming out at the end of this month, but I'll give you some foreshadowing of what those look like. Specific to transportation, really, there's examples of some of the transportation network-oriented resiliency elements that we identified. For example, here in this area around Hooker's Point, right, there is a decent connectivity to rail and road infrastructure, but there isn't very much redundancy. So maybe looking at studying and identifying improvements in this area, given how critical to fuel supply, to wastewater treatment, et cetera, this area is, maybe we should look at, for example, collaborating further with CSX on the resiliency of this single line that enters Hooker's Point, or other highway connections that might be more resilient to support the port, as an example. I'll give you another one. When we looked at Hillsborough County airports specific to access to the highway network, one example that was brought up was frankly, the lack of additional access to the Tampa Executive Airport, and maybe looking at ways to improve the access for use during emergencies, or frankly, just to support the ease of overall movement. Another looks at the I-275 corridor and how critical that is to freight movement, truck-specific infrastructure. Maybe looking at ways to study intelligent transportation systems, direct ramp connections, temporal separation of freight traffic, other ways of making this key north-south route more resilient. It was noted during our study that many of the east-west routes have redundancy, many ways of working across certain elements of Hillsborough County, but the north-south areas are would appear to be at least worth study for critical bottlenecks. And I'll just cover one additional one for you today, since we're running out of time. One of the other important areas that was noted was the congestion around the Aurora Channel area, specific to the mixed use of that area and how susceptible it is to rainfall and sea level rise inundation. And there could be improvements that include truck aprons, mountable infrastructure, improved stormwater facilities, activated stormwater infrastructure, and other ways to handle not only traffic, but other disasters, disruptions associated with wind rain events, especially giving the consideration of this growth in the cruise industry in the area and how that might impact freight movement more broadly. You'll see that we have a number of others here today. Again, because of time, I won't go through all of them, but this is a good example of how we used sea level rise as well as Phoenix inundation to identify areas that might be cut off. This is the example around PSOC and how it really only has a few access points when we consider the inundation area. And then other types of modes were certainly considered in this process, right? We did not just look at rail infrastructure or road infrastructure. We looked at pipeline, port infrastructure as an example. And so this all combined to give us a really nice picture of what opportunities existed for the TPO as well as for the county. There are some additional types, as I mentioned previously, not just transportation, but study, guide, and research, coordination, right? We looked at incorporating supply chain resiliency into the TPO's long-range transportation plan, developing local supply chain resilience best practices guide that could be utilized on social media with local employers and other agencies, coordination across the public and private space with the TPO Freight Advisory Committee as an example, which is critical from an ongoing improvement perspective as we look to improve coordination, improve dialogue, best practice sharing, as well as active work together from a planning and recovery perspective post-disaster. Also looking at setting up some more supply chain focused tabletop and practice, functional practice exercises, similar to what is done, let's say, at the Port of Tampa Bay, with regards to hurricane exercises. We would want to do the same thing for supply chains, right? And incorporate some of those other hazards and disruptions, such as cyber or transportation incidents. Training and other tools, such as setting up a geographic information system or GIS-based tool to assess impacts of the supply chain and resilience in association with these disasters, where we can kind of model and almost create kind of a digital twin of what's happening out in the world. And then grant opportunities, looking at how we can utilize the IIJA and bill funding that exists out there today to improve, let's say, alternative fuel corridors or other infrastructure that helps to support resiliency, specifically supply chains and freight movement. Next steps that we have in this study, we are completing our one-on-one interviews. We have a couple more that we want to conclude before submitting the report. And then we will be finalizing our study and doing the executive summary and making that available to the public at the end of August of this year. Allison?
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to see if we had any questions before we ask for your recommended action, which is to approve the study recommendations so that we can move this on. Next after this is CAC and then the policy committee. Thank you.
Okay, hey Allison, this is Jeff. I mean, just my own comment, certainly it seems like a very comprehensive report, probably difficult to differentiate between general emergency response requirements and then the freight supply aspect of that. I found myself thinking about, you know, a lot of things and then saying, well, that's really not freight supply, but it seems like, I'm curious to see the results. It seems like you've touched on a lot of areas. I'm glad you focused on the Falkenberg Road because that's where our office is. So I'm glad to know that we'll be. But, you know, in all seriousness, you know, I know on a small scale, hurricanes a lot for us generally have preparation time, which is not always the case. And I know for us, we'll try to mobilize vehicles to the higher ground. And I'm assuming that would be something you all would be looking at on a larger scale, you know, trying to make sure freight vehicles and freight infrastructure, where mobile in an event like that, could get to the less prone flood areas. So, I mean, you can comment on that, and then outside of that, I'll open it up for anybody that has other questions.
Yeah, especially for rail, one of the key considerations when dealing with rolling stock is ensuring that you aren't flooding above the axle height, right? Which, you know, 36-inch wheel, you're talking about really half of that, right? So it's not that high, and unfortunately, when freight vehicles, for example, in the case of rail, if they are inundated, then they have to be each manually checked. So there's a long recovery process and potential maintenance issues. So yes, it's very critical to move things if you can. I think that a lot of that is in standard response processes today.
Nicole?
Yeah, so I have a question, Jason. I've just been thinking through a multi-sector perspective on this issue. I'm just wondering what public health or healthcare systems were engaged in the stakeholder efforts and engagement.
Yep. So we talked. Actually, Lauren, can you help me with that specific piece, we talked with a number of hazard response teams as well as health systems. We talked to Tampa General as an example. Lauren, did we have anything else there?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was our main healthcare provider, just because they're the largest. But, you know, the study isn't over until August. So if you want to recommend an entity that we should speak with, then, you know, we certainly can do that.
Excellent. So I would recommend reaching out to the Department of Health here in Hillsborough because, you know, we do emergency response. So I think there would be a really valuable perspective from the public health side, as well as, like you said, the healthcare side.
Excellent. Great recommendation. Thank you.
Yes. So that was a very good presentation. One question for Jason would be, 80 recommendations, that's a lot to dig through. Is there one or two that stand out to you? And a follow-up question would be, did you screen through those recommendations to how they would actually impact the people on the ground today that are in those neighborhoods, like as the Tampa Executive Airport or the I-275 corridor?
Yeah, so on the first question, it is important that the study's recommendations be actionable, and I think you're hitting on that specific point, right? And what we identified were that a number of coordination as well as tool elements that the TPO could help to spearhead would be very, very helpful in this effort to incorporate ongoing feedback as well as to get even more engagement from the public sector. You know, we seem to be very well coordinated from a hazard response perspective, but the real challenges exist in the myriad of companies that call Hillsborough County home, as well as those that service and support the county and its residents. So what's important to do is to incorporate those public sector and private sector inputs and enhance overall coordination and collaboration. To that end, I think one of my most important recommendations from this is to start that process by developing a freight advisory committee and then looking at these data points that we've established in a more geospatial context. We did that with the models that exist for hurricanes as an example, but it would be helpful to take the business entities that exist in the county that are specific to these 5 commodities and services, and then model those in a geospatial context so we have not only the ability to see that on as far as what modeled disasters and disruptions occur, but also during a disaster disruption, be able to see what the hypothetical impact could be very quickly and have a database of contacts with which you could contact those critical supply chain actors. On the second point in question, we did integrate with a number of community sessions, 2 sessions there as part of the study, and incorporated feedback as to how disasters and disruptions themselves impacted access as well as transportation, mobility for these commodities and services. And what came out of that was that a lot of the disruption and impact that occurs to supply chains isn't just that which comes from the weather event or from the cyber attack event. It really comes from the impacts to workforce, the impacts to the ability to get to the place of work, and also to other ancillary factors such as childcare or elements that enable workforce participation. That plus access to food and health and healthcare is another critical one that was voiced and was incorporated into our study.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead.
Quick comment, I guess, for Jason and Allison. I was really happy to be part of the conversation. They had a great talk with me. They were very flexible in their scheduling operation, but glad to talk with them. We went into a little bit of extra innings, but frankly, the conversation could have lasted a lot longer. Got great people that are looking at this kind of stuff. Happy to have the port included in things like this. I'm not surprised that Jason came up with a huge list of recommendations. He was very thorough in his questions in our conversation. One item that this group is probably very familiar with, as part of that rolling implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress required the U.S. Department of Transportation to set up a new freight office housed within the office of the secretary. And so it's interesting to consider at this level an additional freight focused planning group or advisory committee or whatever specific title you want to give that thing. It's important, obviously, looking back over these past couple of years, as everyone is all of a sudden a supply chain expert, it's interesting to see how those kind of movements actually happen. So interesting recommendations, but the biggest thrust of my comment here is just to say it was good to talk with Jason and Allison. Glad to get more of their results of their study. Thank you for letting me participate.
I have a question.
Thank you for your time, Clay. Yeah.
This is Jeff.
This is more procedural, so this might be answered by Gina or Allison. So we're approving the recommendations, but the study's not going to be done until the end of August.
This is the procurement.
We're finalizing, well, we have the recommendations in place, but we wanted to get an additional take from the committees before we finalize the report. So you're not approving the final report, you're approving the recommendations and, you know, the broad scope of the recommendations you see before you. You're just accepting the report, actually, really, if that's a better way to think about it. You're accepting these recommendations.
But the report's not done yet.
Right, just they don't have the final format and they don't have the executive summary called together. But all the findings, save 1 or 2 interviews, are done.
Is this coming back to us?
It can. It can, but we were gonna distribute the final report.
So I was following along. The presentation that was uploaded to the agenda seems to be a little different than the one that was shown today. And then on the executive summary attached to this item, it didn't say that we had to take action, but on the agenda it said we had to take action. So maybe it should come back just that way all the T's are dotted and I's are crossed, or other way around. But
I think we can do that if
or
we'd love to hear kind of your take on the recommendations, though, if you have any.
Okay, I just want to make a comment because I think that was maybe where I was going. We used to have time, maybe because of the recess in July, but we used to bring these things to us as like a status report. So we kind of learn a little bit about it and then bring it back for action. Because I haven't done my due diligence. I just got back from my vacation and I didn't look through these recommendations yet. I'd love to know if Nicole and the health department has some additional thoughts, because TGH might have a different viewpoint than public health and reaching out to the neighborhoods who, like, you know, that reacting to somebody arriving at the, you know, the hospital, but like preventing problems that may reach the hospital before. That kind of thing I was thinking of, and I wanted to know if law enforcement, I thought of maintenance and operations, because to me, that might all have been part of this, but that to me, clearing the rail line, if there's fallen trees or however our goods are reaching us, if that, you know, I'm sure if there's 80 recommendations, that's probably in there somewhere, but I haven't looked to see that those things are in there. So it could come back here even on a consent action that we take, if we'll just go back and look through these recommendations and then, you know, through email or whatever, we decide if there's comments we want to make, and we can have it as a consent item where we don't have another presentation. That's just
that would be fine. I believe on the point on Tampa General Hospital, I know that we had been seeking an interview with them. I thought we finally got one. I have to double check with Lauren. Tammy Rana and Jason have been doing a really great job of covering as many of these sectors as possible, but sometimes they're busy executives, so we haven't been able to capture every single one. But I thought Tampa General was one of the ones that was captured in the interviews. So
yes, we did. We met with them.
That's correct.
Okay, okay, first off, I'm getting the opinion, there's no other questions from the group. So as far as the recommended action, at this point, are we just going to not take action on it today? Or, I mean, we could do a generic accept the draft report as submitted today, but, you know, request future action through consent. I mean, how formal do you want it?
Chair, in fact, you could scale it back to draft recommendations, if that's okay. Doesn't have to be the draft report.
Think that's reasonable. Okay, so with that, I think we're looking for a motion to accept the draft recommendations from the report presented today. I can't make a motion.
So this is Jay Collins. I'll make a motion to accept the draft recommendations of the Freight Supply Chain Resilience Study, and that study shall return to the TAC at a time to be determined for final approval.
Thank you, Jay. Do we have a second?
Jennifer Malone, I'll second it.
All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
For your time.
All right, so with that, we will move on to public participation plan. We're not hearing anything, dude.
That mute button. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Davida with the Franklin with the TPO, and I'm going to go ahead and present to you some proposed amendments to the public participation plan. Okay. Now, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
We
All right.
can.
Great. All right, so the public participation plan is a document that the TPO uses to guide how we engage with the public and how they engage with us. It's updated every 2 years, and it's based on the measures of effectiveness report, which you had in front of you some months ago. And that report gives us information on how well we've done in the previous 2 years, and it makes recommendations on ways that we can improve how we engage with the public. So I have 2 amendments that I would like to propose to the public participation plan. One involves the amount of time that the public has to review proposed TIP amendments, and the other one involves how we notify the public and engage with them when TIP amendments are up for consideration. And so before I show you the details of the words that are going to change in the plan, I want to actually show you the work that was done to see just how great of a job we can do at notifying the public for when TIP amendments come up for consideration, and also how we are handling a situation that has arisen where we don't have that much time as we had before to notify the public. So here you have in front of you 2 items. One is a social media post that we put out there for the West River District Build Grant project. That was a TIP amendment that came forth last year. And then the other one is a road sign that we also put out for the amendment review period. So both of these are items that we had not done before, or processes rather that we had not done before in regards to TIP amendments. I'm sorry, was that a question?
It is.
Oh, okay, I guess there's some talking that I can hear. Okay, so so these 2 items are processes that we had put in place as a pilot last year once the TPO discovered that the review period originally of 21 days for TIP amendments, actually in reality, it's about 2 weeks time. And that's because of the amount of time that we have between committee meetings and the board meetings. And so that time over the year has changed. As a result, the document is actually, as it is right now, does not accurately portray the amount of time that the public has to review TIP amendments. So once we realized that this time frame has decreased, we said, okay, maybe there's a a huge effort that we can put out there in terms of making the public aware of these amendments. So these were just two of the things we did besides putting out a dedicated webpage for TIP amendments for each one, as well as also doing a newsletter article or press release to get more coverage for TIP amendments. So again, you're looking at these two of the four things that we did, and we had a very successful run with this pilot. Prior to this pilot, we only would put a TIP amendment on our web page, on a website rather. But during the pilot, because of these new ways of engaging the public, we actually received over 24 responses to just the West River District Build project TIP amendment alone. So that's a huge increase from receiving nothing before from the public for TIP amendments. So I just want to show these items to give you a perspective of the success that we've seen in gaining interest in TIP amendments from the public by being more proactive, even though the time frame that we have to show them this information has decreased. So here are the items that are changing in the plan in terms of the wording. So you have in the plan a chart that shows that there's 21 days currently. We're going to reduce that with your approval to 14 days. And again, that's more realistic in terms of the time that we have in between committee meetings and the board meeting. And then we also have some verbiage here that again addresses the 21-day time frame where it's changing to 14 days. And then we also have something here that talks about all the stuff that we're doing now. As we've said, hey, we have this window that we can take more advantage of. So here you see that again, like I mentioned before, that public notice will now include a social media post, which are strategic posts where we're targeting different zip codes that are in the vicinities of these projects or these amendments. Also notice on our planhillsboro.org website, either a press release or newsletter article. And also I have here, we're putting, thanks to some responses that we received from committee meetings, we're going to start adding in these notices to the calendars of news media sites. And also we're going to place road signs. So we're going to continue doing these things that we started doing during the pilot, in addition to mailing out notices to areas where the project is requiring a right-of-way acquisition. And that's also something that actually came out of review of this presentation to previous committees. And so here we have another piece here where again, we're changing, where you see at the bottom 3, I'll say 2 weeks. And here again, we have an explanation of all the effort that we will put out there to assure that the public is in the front of this in terms of receiving information anytime a TIP amendment comes up. So that's basically it. This is, again, just 2 amendments. One, to adjust the time frame to what it really is in terms of the amount of time that we have for the public to review a TIP amendment, or at least the minimum that we have to review when a TIP amendment comes forth. And then also the amendment that will include the different ways that we're engaging the public, which again, we have 4, actually now 5 things. So a dedicated webpage, social media post, a press release or a newsletter article, road signs, and then also sending out mailers to folks who live in the vicinities of these projects that come forth. So the recommended action is to approve the public participation plan amendments. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thanks, Kavita. Are there any questions for the proposed amendments?
Yes.
Yes.
This is all very good. This is somewhat.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing anyone.
Same here, Davida. Let me check.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, was someone speaking?
It seems like the camera and the owl are frozen in the room.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's what I'm seeing. I'm not sure who's on site to remedy that.
Greg, this is Wade. I'm on site. Do you want me to go in and check on it?
Yes, if you could, Wade, please.
Sure. One sec.
Thank you. It looks like we lost everyone, Davida, so I would imagine Wade is rebooting.
Okay,
So
okay, thanks.
Hold tight. You're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. I'm logging into the podium computers to see.
Didn't I just hear a presentation on resilience?
Okay, Gina's calling me. Oh.
Greg, looks like he's rebooting the podium computer. It says offline for me to access.
Okay, so Gina Torres checked in and they're still trying to get things together. And there are two questions that I will address once we're back up.
Hi, Priya. I'm sorry. The dog was going crazy. Did you, you were messaging me something?
No, I just tried to log in from the assist remote login, and it looks like he's rebooting the whole computer.
Yeah, I think Wade went into the room and that's probably what, because I've never seen it just stop in the mid of audio and video.
The video was, I know, probably I thought like he's gonna just turn off the owl and turn back in. Looks like he's rebooting the whole computer, so it's
Yeah,
gonna take a
I
little
don't
bit
know,
of time.
it's possible they might have even lost connection at the office because everybody's gone now. So what,
Okay.
Davida, what did Gina say to you?
No, I was saying I'm on, so it looks like the presenters, remote people are on.
Yeah, Gina said that that
Calling
they
me
were
now.
rebooting and yes, they still had a couple of questions, so to hang on.
Yeah, apparently. So Wade is trying to reboot. Did they lose the internet? Yeah, this is really unusual. It's never happened before. I will get Michael on the phone too, see what he can find out. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Davida, everybody, you still there?
Yes.
I can't.
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
we're here.
We're working on the stuff. The Wi-Fi has gone out in that room, so we're trying to get it going on. Unfortunately, you know, it's the Wi-Fi itself that has stopped, and I don't know where to go to reset that, Greg. Do you know where that actual hard box Wi-Fi exists?
We are
Jason,
talking to Michael. Sorry.
I'm here.
yeah, did you hear that Wade's question?
Nope.
I did not.
Okay. The Wi-Fi completely went out. They want to know how to reset it in the room. Is it?
Wi-Fi, that doesn't make any sense.
So we can't, I mean, the computer in there and our phones,
Wi-Fi in the office working at all?
it is not working at all. That's correct. Is there something I can do to work on that?
Jason's checking into it. Hold on, Wade.
Thank you. And for Segal on the line, Jen is here to present in
My
person.
machine in the office just connected to the Wi-Fi.
Okay, so maybe that's maybe it's resetting. One sec, let me go back in there and check.
So as far as I can tell from here, the Wi-Fi in the office should be working.
Okay. So, you think it was one of those hiccups where it disconnected and was trying to reconnect?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
And there's nothing anyone in the room could have done to disconnect the Wi-Fi accidentally? Like they did not trip on a wire or?
I mean, the Wi-Fi, no, but if somebody tripped over one of those wires in the room, yeah, they could have shut the podium down.
Mike's calling. Let me see what he has to say.
Okay.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Will?
Sorry I missed the call earlier.
Oh, that's okay. We're trying to figure out, they lost the Wi-Fi in the Plan Hillsborough room.
Oh.
And they're trying to reconnect now.
Hey, Greg, make sure he knows he's hot with us online.
Yeah, the best Wi-Fi is on.
Hello, is Wade in the Plan Hillsborough room?
Greg, this is Beth. Wade has probably gone into the Plan Hillsborough room. I can walk in there and tell him something if you want.
Yeah, Mike just said that we could try to reset the Wi-Fi. It's at the front desk in the lobby. We would unplug it and plug it back in.
Okay. All right, we'll give it a try.
Well, thank you.
So from what I understand from Gina, is the committee is going to move forward with the presentation as they are able to do it in the room. Let's see here. For Kittleson and Associates, you are unmuted, or I have unmuted you. So if you need to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Jennifer Musselman. I'm in the room and I
Jennifer.
can share the presentation this way, and Sigal can share the slides for the folks on GoToMeeting so we can proceed. I'll just keep my phone on if this works. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Yep.
And Davida has let go of the presentation. And you said that who needs to have presentation for online?
Sigal.
Got it?
Sigal, S-I-G-A-L.
Yeah, okay. All right, I've given them that, I've given Sigal that ability. There we go. Can everybody online see the presentation?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
All right, so on the 56 and 50 Street corridor.
Right here. So I'll let that flow get touched. And then
Okay. I personally am going to have to go into the room for recording purposes since I'm not sure that there's going to be able to be a recording that I will be able to hear for the minutes. So I'm going to mute my mic and go into the room.
Okay. Thank you, Gail.
Okay. And so we're seeing slide sorter view, not the presenter view. You're seeing it in the room, but for the folks online.
Yes, we are able to see. We are online.
Yeah, when I have it in the full presenter view, can you hear me, Jen?
Yes.
In the full presenter view, it actually switches to another screen. So can I actually leave it like this or figure out how to show my other screen?
I think that works.
Yeah, you're fine to leave it like that. We can view it perfectly.
Okay.
Okay, so Sigal, if you want to go to the agenda, we'll jump in, go through some background, some of the issues and opportunities that we found through this study, and share some concepts with you all. So we are looking at 50th and 56th. Many of you in the physical and virtual room have helped out with this study, so thank you all for your time throughout the process. We're looking at 8.5 miles from the Solomon Expressway to the south, all the way up to Fletcher to the north. That piece from Fowler to Fletcher is county maintained. It is not a state road. This is an FDOT study, but we're looking at it just for kind of continuity and to provide some consistent recommendations up there. The majority of the corridor is 4 lanes. The piece within the city of Tampa, kind of between I-4 and the Solomon, is 6 lanes. We have sidewalks most of the way, on-street bike lanes in a lot of places, a lot of variation in speeds. So we have high speeds, 50 miles an hour, especially in the southern part, all the way down to 35 miles per hour in the downtown Temple Terrace area, and quite a bit of transit activity. One of the real emphasis for this study is the Hillsborough TPO Vision Zero Action Plan. So there are 2 segments, one on 50th Street and one on 56th Street, are part of the network. So they have an unusually high number of severe and fatal injury crashes. So safety has been a key focus throughout this study. We're about 2/3 of the way through the project. So we came to y'all once to share some existing conditions, and now we are back to share potential concepts before we go to the public later in August. Our purpose statement, you'll see again, safety first and foremost, so eliminate fatal and severe injury crashes and prioritize accessibility of multimodal options through design and operational strategies that support existing and future places. So a lot loaded into that with safety first, providing choices for folks. We'll see through the slides, this is a very low income area, a lot of folks without access to a vehicle, and wanting to use the full gamut of treatments at our disposal, design solutions and operation solutions that support not just the folks that are there now, but what we think the street would look like in the future, especially in the Temple Terrace area. So a quick summary for those that were here during our first presentation. This will be a recap, but we do have a lot of transit service out here. This is one of Hart's most productive corridors. And we have the Net Park Transfer Center along the corridor between Hillsborough and MLK. So if you look at the map, the size of the bubbles is the number of people getting on and off the bus. So we have that Net Park Transfer Center, which is our largest activity zone for transit. And then you see a lot of the key corridors, Fowler, Bush, Hillsborough being really big transfer centers as folks take the bus up and down 56th Street and then east-west on some of these major corridors. For safety, again, a high number of fatal and severe injury crashes on this corridor. We had 11 fatalities along the 8 miles in the last 5 years, and then over 400 crashes involving an injury. So folks whose lives were forever changed by a crash on this corridor. You're seeing them clustered all throughout. There's not really one specific hotspot, a lot of intersection crashes, a lot of segment crashes, and a lot of bicycle and pedestrian crashes all throughout. Those are the numbers in blue and green on either side. From a traffic perspective, things are operating relatively well today, at least for the Tampa Bay area. So level of service D or better on the majority of our intersections and segments. Where we are seeing delays, it's really intersection driven. So Hillsborough, Fowler, causing some of those larger delays throughout the corridor. I mentioned speed was a challenge out here. So the posted speed varies between 35 and 50, but pretty consistently, regardless of what the sign says, folks are going 50 and above out on this street. Even in our 35 mile per hour zone, we're still having people consistently go over 50 miles an hour. And at one of our locations, we clocked over 150 people going 70 plus throughout one day. So interstate speeds that we're seeing out here on 56th Street. And then a quick demographic snapshot. I mentioned this is a very diverse corridor. So 2/3 of folks are non-white, Black or Hispanic, very diverse population. This is also a very low income area. So there are majority of folks live below the county median as far as income goes. And there's a significant amount of the population that is in extreme poverty or living on less than $17,000 a year. There's also a lot of children out on this corridor. We have King High School immediately adjacent, Temple Terrace Elementary School, several private elementary and middle schools out here, and then a lot of young people that are living on these corridors and trying to get to and from school every day. A quick summary of what we've heard from earlier engagements. I mentioned Project Advisory Group. Many of you all are a part of it. We also did stakeholder interviews, talking to some more specific neighborhood groups and businesses out here. And then we had a public meeting in December to collect additional input. Key themes, not surprisingly, speeding is a common concern among folks. Students trying to cross the street, wanting to improve conditions for transit out here, wanting to see some more continuous bicycle facilities and better options to cross the street, especially at some of our larger intersections. And then from a land use perspective, not foreseeing a lot of change within the city section and even within the county section, but Temple Terrace downtown is expecting a lot of redevelopment, and we're already starting to see some of that happening today. And getting into some of our concepts. So general changes that we're looking at all of the major intersections, trying to provide more space for bikes through protected intersections. So that top image shows you an example of those where we have some median space for bicyclists to stage and make turns through intersections. Wanting to improve pedestrian crossings. So in that middle intersection, you can see we have a lot of skewed intersections on this corridor where we have diagonal crossings that could be more straight, and also median refuge islands that could be extended to provide folks an option to wait halfway. And then in the bottom image, you see an example of a larger intersection on the corridor. This is Hillsborough Avenue. So we did a close look to see if all the turn lanes are needed out here, if there's any way we can shorten some of these crossing distances, so that pedestrians are not as exposed as they're trying to get across. We have two examples to share. We won't go through all of the intersections that we looked at, but wanted to take a very large intersection example and then a bit of a smaller intersection example on the next slide. So this is Hillsborough Avenue. What we've done is removed those high-speed channelized right turns. And in 3 of the approaches, we kept a right turn lane. We just brought it into the intersection. And in 1 of the approaches where there's not a lot of right turn volume, we did a shared through right. So this adds 3 seconds of vehicle delay in the PM peak hour. So we are slowing cars down a bit, but the pedestrian crossing distance is cut in half. Bikes have those islands where they can wait to cross the street and make turns. And with the, there we go. And then by slowing down those right turners, we expect crashes to reduce by about 1/4 just from that treatment alone at this intersection. And then this is an example at Sly Avenue, so one of the smaller intersections, if you want to call it that, out here. Same treatment, just trying to pull in some of these high-speed right turns, still preserving some of the right turn lanes, especially the ones that need to facilitate the King High School circulation. But even with that, we're able to, again, reduce the crossing distance significantly. We are increasing vehicle delay by about 15 seconds, but if you drive out here, you know, Sly can handle a little bit more than maybe Hillsborough can, so that's not, the intersection is still operating at level of service D or E even with that. And at this particular intersection, with the shorter crossings, we can get the cycle length down, so also reducing pedestrian delay quite a bit out here. Yes. Yes, so King High School would be in the southeast corner of this graphic. So this is the signal that students are using to get to and from school if they're walking or biking or driving. And then some of our typical section changes, you got a preview with the intersections. If you are looking at some of the approaches, we've broken it up into 3 different districts. So the first is where we currently have 6 lanes of traffic in that southernmost part. We have option number 1 here. If we want to maintain the current curb and do kind of a quick project, get something out there more quickly, we could repurpose the outside lane, add a traffic separator, and have a 2-way separated bike lane. Or some concerns about this one from the project advisory group with the 2-way bicycle traffic causing some conflicts at driveways and side streets. And so number 2 was preferred there to have the 1-way separated bike lanes to minimize some of those conflicts. This would be a bit of a larger project as we are moving in curb and gutter. Number 3 would be shared use path. So having pedestrians and bicycles share the space, fully separated from the roadway. And then option number 4, we cannot apply this everywhere, but there is a sub-segment where there's an on-street bike lane. And so where that is present, we could pull the curb in and have a wide walk or a wide sidewalk for bikes and peds to use while keeping the 6 lanes. There is the very southern part by the Silman Expressway. We cannot do this. There's no bike lane, and so there's nothing we can do without buying right of way or repurposing a lane. From a segment operations perspective, if we do repurpose that outside travel lane, generally still seeing level of service C and D in the peak periods. If we achieve what our target speed is of 30 miles an hour, the thresholds change. And so we start to see some level of service ease, and this is all in 2045. So this would need further evaluation if it were to move forward, but at a high level, it seems like an option that could be feasible and could be worth taking a closer look. The majority of the corridor is 4 lanes today with an open drainage both in the median and on the outside with on-street bike lanes and a sidewalk. So we have 2 main options here. The first on the left, it would be a near-term option to add a shared use path. So keeping the roadway as it is, but then adding the path on either side, kind of limiting impacts to drainage and to roadway. And then if we wanted to come back or start with a larger project, the option on the right has that 1-way separated bicycle facility and adds curb and gutter to create more of an urban typical section where we've seen a lot of development and really don't need that open typical section anymore. And then the last kind of unique area on the corridor is in the downtown Temple Terrace section. So kind of between the river and Bush Boulevard. Today it is 4 lanes divided with sharrows as the bicycle facility and sidewalks. So we have 2 options here. One simply takes a little bit of space from the lanes and the buffer space to create as wide a sidewalk as we can, so we can get 11 feet without doing work to the median. And then if we did want to kind of pull everything in, narrow the median up, have these spot medians, we can get a full shared use path with a landscaped buffer. Also kind of imagined what Temple Terrace could look like in the future, and so this is where land use and transportation really come together. You can see in that top right corner where Temple Terrace has already started to redevelop. If this continues in a similar pattern, you can start to see how this can really feel like a downtown with consistent blocks, consistent crossings for pedestrians, and feel more like a slow street that the community desires. So before, happy to take any questions or comments, but for our next steps, we're meeting with the public at the end of the month. From there, we'll regroup with our project advisory group to select a preferred alternative or set of alternatives, and then wrap up our study. So for public meetings, we have 2 options, one at the Holiday Inn Express in Tampa and one at the Miller Center in Hillsborough County by King High School. So those will both be in person. And then we have a virtual lunchtime meeting for folks that want to tune in that way. So with that, we have study website, but happy to take any questions, and maybe we'll start in the room first.
I'm not sure we can hear anyone.
I can, and then I can repeat back to you. Yeah, I just have it here.
Yeah, I would start in the room, but yeah, I remember this one distinctly coming previously, and there's a lot going on that corridor, and there's an industrial section just north of Hillsborough, which gets a fair amount of truck traffic at times. And then, Tampa Bay Tech's right behind King. I'm sure that Sly intersection probably has more pedestrian traffic than your average intersection. So Temple Terrace is cool. So anyway, yeah, certainly looking forward to what your ultimate suggestions are, because I think this is an area that does need to be addressed. So,
is there anyone else that would like to go?
Oh, okay. Anyone else?
Hi. Go ahead. Okay, thanks. I was really happy to be part of the team, the stakeholder team. Just a couple comments. I do love that we have separated on-road bike facilities where, if we can repurpose a lane or whatever, however we can get them there. And I see that they're not in section that's, like the 4-lane section through the Main Street area, but you can actually start using the lane with the vehicle if the speeds are able to be dropped. But like main point, and I know that you have this as part of your study, maybe they just didn't have enough time or slides, but many of the crashes that I've seen, the fatal crashes, are people crossing the road, not necessarily along it. So to help, reduce the speed limits, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of mid-block crossings suggested along the corridor, because that's where I'm familiar with some of the fatalities that I've read about.
Yeah, that's a good point. For folks online that might not have heard the question, a lot of the serious crashes out here have been people crossing outside of the intersections, mid-block, which is legal, I'll add, in almost all cases, so they're not necessarily doing anything wrong there. At the public meeting, we will have, and this will be shared online too, a spot treatment board that will identify the proposed mid-block crossing locations, so places that have come up through conversations with you all, and then places in the data that we're seeing those high crashes and crossings happening today.
Any other comments or questions?
That's kind of one of my questions was, at least within the Temple Terrace downtown corridor, was how many mid-block crossings you're planning within that corridor?
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on the exact number. And part of it too within Temple Terrace in particular has a lot to do with future development. Right now there's a lot of directional turn lanes that don't always lend themselves well to crossings, but as we start to redevelop, maybe make some true street connections across, have more traditional intersections, and I think we can start to see more happening just within that zone.
Just a comment, if you want to go back to that downtown Temple Terrace, yeah, that figure right here. So what's not shown in here is the Winn-Dixie. It's like, for us, is kind of a roadblock for us to cross from Bullard down to what you see there at the pond. So like, this whole section right here is kind of being taken up already by this huge Winn-Dixie spot. We've actually hired a consultant to figure out a pedestrian way to travel from, because we're also looking at redeveloping this area down here to kind of tie Hillsborough River to Bullard Parkway, where we do have all these new apartment complexes. And this has been kind of a sticking point for us right now. More of an FYI that this area looks nice this way, but with Winn-Dixie there, it's never going to kind of look like that without the line.
Do you want me to open it up to folks online?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, yeah, any questions from GoTo?
Okay, I guess hearing none, we will close this presentation. And thank you very much for your public report. Final report. Are we going back now?
Yeah, we're gonna call Davida because we're at the end of that and we'll share with her any questions. And,
Do you want me to stay on here, Gina, or hop off? Stay in the meeting?
I don't know, are you gonna be here?
Yeah, I can stay.
Right, so you like to hear any questions from the people online?
Yeah.
And this is my phone. Okay, so I'm gonna call.
Thanks, Sigal.
This is Jennifer Musselman. I don't know, did you?
Oh, hi, everyone. Jennifer Musselman.
What is your public workshop?
It is, I don't want to lie to you. It's the last week of, or second to last week of August. Nope. Yeah, so it's the 30th and the 31st.
Well, they can. It's nice.
Should I mute?
Okay, Davida.
There's notification of tip and then that's.
Gina, people at home cannot hear the presentation that's on in the room. Did you want Davida to come back online?
Link to tweet that went out. Here's all of this to show the proof that this was actually occurring.
I should have been on there. Did you hear the question, Davida?
So I heard, the first question was, is this a federal government requirement? I think that's what the question was. Excuse me.
Can you guys hear me in the room? Okay.
Yes, we
We're
are
having to
required.
use a couple different phones, so they're asking if we can hear them.
Wait, can you hear me?
Are you talking about the report, like the measures of effectiveness report, when we go back and we take a look at everything that we've done? Are you referring to that one? Yes, so when TIP amendments are presented, we do have a staff member who actually presents all of the efforts that are being taken. So for instance, with the last TIP amendment that we had earlier this year, Connor showed the road signs, showed a picture of the social media post, and also went on to describe the different ways that we were engaging with the public, which were the page, the web page, as well as the article that appeared in the newsletter. So that happens with each amendment when it's presented. So is that the answer that kind of helps you out there? Okay.
You guys can do always to show.
I'm gonna try sitting here with my phone. I can't hear anything online, anything that you guys are saying.
Well, we have a quorum, so maybe we can but we have a quorum, so we can take action.
And Davita's answering my questions. So yeah, we're communicating with her.
Okay, well, that's good.
All right, is there any more questions?
So we have one more question, Davita.
Okay.
Look at the game show.
I was just curious to know how this shortening the time frame compares to the other TPOs surrounding us. What their if they still do 21 days as well.
So I do not have an answer to that question. I can get back to you. What I can tell you is just comparing to ourselves, we've done a phenomenal job getting more input. So I had mentioned earlier that prior to putting in place this pilot that we did last year with having all of these practices put into place, all we did was just put on our website that a TIP amendment was coming up and to please, notify us if you have any questions. So that was the engagement that we had with the public. Now with what we're doing, and again, with the results that we received from last year, we had over 24 respondents who asked questions or gave comments, and that is 24 more than what we had in previous years. So although I don't know the answer to that question, I can tell you that just by what we're doing, even with the shorter time frame, we're able to reach more people because we're doing more stuff. And marketing studies have shown that folks are mostly paying attention within the first 2 weeks of, before anything. And in fact, most of the comments that we received were within the 5 days before the closing of the review period. So it does work. However, I will get back to you because I'm curious too. So let's see what other folks are doing in terms of the time frame.
We're covered there. So any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're going to try to take an in-person vote here. So the motion is to approve the public participation plan.
Jonathan Scott, motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Second.
Jay Collins, second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Davita.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Loretta, this is Beth Alden. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. We still don't have a way for the folks in the room to hear you. And I apologize so much for wasting your time.
Well, let me say this. because the board looked at the operating budget this morning. We're going to do the capital budget on the 15th. You want me to come back to the next meeting?
That would be great.
I can
I
do
will-
that. That way I won't waste your time. And, you know, it seems like we're having some very tough technical difficulties. So if you want me to just come back, you didn't waste my time. Those were good presentations and I can always come back. When is your next meeting?
So the Technical Advisory Committee meets again on let's see, it is on September 12th. That's a Monday again. It's the Monday after Labor Day.
Okay, the problem with that is that that's the date that we take the tentative budget and millage to the board, and I really can't share before I
Sure.
go to the board
Okay.
on that particular day, because we may have some updates.
Right. Right, yeah, so you'd be talking to the board in the morning, right?
No, because it's a public hearing, we're going to talk to the board at 5:30 p.m. This is the trim. We'll be in the trim process, and you can't have a public hearing before 5 p.m.
Right, right. Okay. Well, would it be any different than the information that you would have provided today?
Well, I don't have the capital today because we're taking the capital August 15th.
Right. Okay. Okay.
But I do have a meeting scheduled on Wednesday. There's another committee meeting on Wednesday that I'm supposed to present to.
It is. That's the Citizens Advisory Committee. So that's, you know, going to be more general public rather than a technical committee. So we would love to have you speak to the Citizens Advisory Committee if you're so willing to do that.
I have it on my calendar.
Okay.
But I
Okay,
know
well,
people had a lot of questions about capital, and so I didn't know when you wanted to, unless you just want to wait until after the budget is approved. But you all are, I know they wanted to ask some questions. Where is this and where is that? And Omar will be on, you know, he's going to be on the call when we do the capital budget.
okay.
You know, our chief delivery officer.
Okay.
Have they finished the meeting?
Yeah, they adjourned the TAC meeting, yes.
Okay, because it was so much going on and it was hard to hear. Okay. So what do you want me to do?
Okay, well, let's keep you on the agenda for the Wednesday meeting. And
I'm
then,
on the agenda for the Wednesday. Okay.
and would you like us to get back in touch with you about the Technical Advisory Committee and what the best time is for that?
Yeah, and because when I met with, I forget who it was, but they said we had a lot of questions and they sent some questions ahead of time. Was that for technical advisory or for another committee?
I honestly don't know. I'll have to ask.
This is Elizabeth. That was for the CAC.
Okay.
And when is their next meeting?
Wednesday.
Okay, so if you want Omar to be on Wednesday, we could talk about it. I'm just not presenting the capital because we're going back to the board, but you can certainly ask questions about what's included. So we're scheduled for Wednesday. So this committee, there's no loss, no foul or anything, because this was not the committee that wanted to ask questions about the capital. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll make a point for me and Omar to be on Wednesday. I have it on my calendar, and you probably send him there. And right now, all the other executives are in the leadership meeting because it goes from 2 to 3 o'clock on Mondays. So I just didn't attend because I was here to present to you. But it's no harm, no foul, no problem at all.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. We have to adapt to whatever happens. And so I have it on my calendar for Wednesday at 9 a.m.
That's it.
And I'll be there. And then if there's any questions, then we can address them at that time. I just hate that this committee, the Technical Advisory Committee, didn't have that opportunity. But if they were okay, they adjourned. So if they're okay, I'm okay.
Okay.
But I can always come back to them if you want me to when the budget is approved to give them an overview of the budget, whatever you all decide. Okay?
Okay, we'll talk about that. I think that'd probably be October 10th, but I'll loop back with you, Ms. Kirk.
Okay, very good. Okay, so to the other person speaking, I can see Elizabeth. I can't see anybody else. Elizabeth?
Elizabeth just went away.
Yes, okay. Now I have a whole audience. Okay. This was too crazy. I've
Excuse me,
never
1
seen
minute,
this.
actually. It's still recording. Can I stop the recording?
Yes.
Yes.